Cartoons in the 1980s were supposed to be harmless, bright colors, simple heroes, and happy endings before the cereal commercials returned. But a few episodes crossed a line. Some were too frightening. Others sparked controversy or tackled themes far darker than anyone expected on Saturday morning television. Parents complained, networks grew nervous, and certain broadcasts quietly disappeared from regular rotation. Tonight, we're counting down 10 80s cartoons that shocked audiences and briefly pushed children's animation into surprisingly unsettling territory. Number 10, Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures, The Littlest Tramp, 1987. Saturday morning cartoons in the late 1980s were watched very closely. Networks understood that even small controversies could lead to complaints from parents, my sponsors, and advocacy groups. In a time when children's television was already under heavy scrutiny, anything resembling drug imagery was considered especially risky. That is exactly what happened with an episode of Mighty Mouse, The New Adventures, titled The Littlest Tramp. The animated reboot of Mighty Mouse had already gained attention for its unusual humor and energetic style. Created with a faster pace and more exaggerated animation than most children's shows, the series often included quick visual gags that flashed by in seconds. One of those gags became the center of a national controversy. In a brief scene, Mighty Mouse finds a crushed flower on the ground. Curious, he bends down and dramatically inhales the petals. The moment is extremely quick and meant as a stylized joke. But to some viewers, the animation looked suspiciously like a character snorting cocaine. Within days of the broadcast, advocacy groups began contacting CBS. At the time, the United States was deep in the war on drugs, and television networks were regularly airing anti-drug public service announcements aimed at young audiences. The idea that a children's superhero might appear to imitate drug use, even unintentionally, caused immediate concern. CBS responded quickly. The episode was removed from regular rotation, and later, broadcasts edited or avoided the controversial moment. Number 9, The Real Ghostbusters, The Boogeyman Cometh, 1986. Most episodes of The Real Ghostbusters balanced spooky imagery with comedy. Slimer provided comic relief, and the Ghostbusters usually handled supernatural threats with gadgets, jokes, and chaotic energy. The series was designed to be slightly creepy, but still safe for Saturday morning audiences. But one episode pushed the atmosphere much further than viewers expected. The episode, titled The Boogeyman Cometh, introduced a creature that fed directly on children's fear. Unlike many villains in the series, the Boogeyman was not played for laughs. His skeletal design, hollow glowing eyes, and deep echoing voice created a far more unsettling presence than the usual ghosts. The story focused on children being targeted in their bedrooms. Closet doors became gateways to another dimension where the monster waited in the darkness. For young viewers, that detail made the threat feel disturbingly real. Closets were not distant fantasy locations. They were part of every child's bedroom. When the episode first aired in the mid-1980s, several local stations reportedly received complaints from parents whose children experienced nightmares after watching it. While the episode was never officially banned across the country, some affiliates quietly removed it from rerun rotation during the show's early broadcast run. Ironically, the same qualities that frightened viewers at the time later made the episode legendary among fans. Today, many consider The Boogeyman Cometh one of the most memorable and atmospheric stories in the entire Real Ghostbusters series. Number 8, The Smurfs Squeaky, 1982. When the Smurfs premiered on NBC in the early 1980s, it quickly became one of the most successful Saturday morning cartoons on television. The series was known for cheerful adventures in a colorful village, gentle humor, and simple moral lessons. Each episode usually followed a predictable pattern in which the tiny blue characters outsmarted the villainous wizard Gargamel through teamwork and clever thinking. But one episode introduced a storyline that felt far more intense than audiences expected. The episode, titled Squeaky, begins when the Smurfs discover a small dragon-like creature wandering near their village. The creature appears harmless. Instead of roaring like a typical dragon, it squeaks softly and behaves more like a frightened animal than a monster. The Smurfs quickly grow fond of it and attempt to protect it. However, Gargamel soon captures the creature. Instead of the usual comedic villainy, Gargamel treats the animal like a scientific specimen. He locks it inside a cage and begins studying it, hoping to exploit its unusual abilities for his own benefit. The episode spends several moments focusing on the creature's fear and confusion as it struggles to escape captivity. For young viewers, the emotional tone of the story felt heavier than typical Smurfs adventures. The animation lingers on the creature trembling behind bars, while Gargamel coldly discusses how it might be used. During the early 1980s, public conversations about animal testing and laboratory ethics were beginning to gain attention. Some parents felt that the imagery of confinement and exploitation was unexpectedly distressing for children who tuned in expecting harmless fantasy. Number 7. Dungeons and Dragons. The Dragon's Graveyard, 1985. The animated Dungeons and Dragons series was already controversial before it even premiered. During the early 1980s, some critics worried that fantasy stories involving magic, monsters, and mystical powers might negatively influence children. The show was based on the popular tabletop role-playing game, which had already been the subject of public debate in certain communities. Despite those concerns, the series usually delivered adventurous stories about a group of teenagers transported into a magical world. Each episode focused on survival, teamwork, and their ongoing struggle against the powerful villain known as Venger. But one episode took a noticeably darker turn. The episode, titled The Dragon's Graveyard, begins when the heroes stumble upon a hidden valley filled with the skeletal remains of dragons. The setting alone creates an eerie and unsettling atmosphere. Massive bones stretch across the landscape, reminding the characters of the violent history of the place. However, the real tension comes when the group realizes they may finally have a chance to defeat Venger once and for all. For the first time in the series, the characters openly discuss the possibility of killing their enemy. Some of them express anger and frustration after everything Venger has done to them. The conversation becomes unusually serious for a Saturday morning cartoon, focusing on revenge, justice, and the consequences of violence. Instead of quickly dismissing the idea, the episode allows the moral debate to unfold. Each character struggles with the decision before ultimately reaching a conclusion. In the end, the group refuses to take Venger's life. And they recognize that choosing violence would make them no better than the villain they oppose. Number 6. Captain Planet and the Planeteers. Mind Pollution, 1990. Although Captain Planet and the Planeteers premiered at the very end of the 1980s, the series reflected social anxieties that had been building throughout the decade. Environmental destruction, pollution, and corporate greed were central themes, and the show often tried to teach young viewers about real-world problems. But one episode stepped into territory that few children's cartoons had attempted before. The episode was titled Mind Pollution. In the story, the greedy industrialist Luton Plunder begins distributing an illegal substance to teenagers as part of a larger scheme to expand his influence and profits. Rather than presenting the problem as a distant or abstract threat, the episode shows how easily young people can be manipulated. Several scenes depict teenagers behaving erratically after exposure to the substance. Friends begin turning against each other, and characters struggle with peer pressure and poor decision-making. The episode portrays how addiction can distort judgment and damage relationships. For Saturday morning television, this approach felt unusually direct. Most cartoons of the era avoided serious social issues or softened them through fantasy metaphors. Mind Pollution did the opposite. The characters openly discuss drug abuse, manipulation, and the long-term consequences of losing control over one's actions. The episode was designed as a strong anti-drug message, on encouraging viewers to think critically about peer pressure and dangerous substances. However, some local broadcasters worried that the subject itself might be too intense for younger audiences watching weekend cartoons. Because of those concerns, certain affiliates scheduled the episode less frequently during early broadcast rotations. Over time, Mind Pollution gained recognition for its bold storytelling. Many viewers now praise the episode for confronting a difficult real-world issue in a responsible and educational way. Number 5. The Care Bears, The Land Without Feelings, 1983. Few cartoon franchises in the 1980s appeared safer than the Care Bears. Their stories focused on kindness, sharing, and emotional understanding. Yet the characters themselves were soft pastel animals who lived high above the clouds in a place called Care-a-Lot. To parents and networks, the brand represented the gentlest side of children's television. But an early television special titled The Land Without Feelings introduced a tone that surprised many viewers. The story follows a young boy named Kevin who discovers an old spell book while feeling lonely and misunderstood. What Kevin does not realize is that the book is controlled by a sinister spirit determined to manipulate his emotions. Slowly, the influence begins to change him. Kevin starts rejecting friendship and kindness. He grows distant from the people around him, pushing away anyone who tries to help. His personality becomes colder, more bitter, and more isolated. The animation reflects this transformation, showing his expressions darken as the mysterious force tightens its control. For a children's broadcast in 1983, the idea of a child's emotions being manipulated by a supernatural presence felt unexpectedly intense. The villain does not simply threaten a city or a magical kingdom. Instead, he attempts to hollow out the compassion of a young boy. Some parents felt that the imagery of emotional corruption and supernatural influence might be unsettling for very young viewers. As a result, certain later broadcasts softened a few scenes and adjusted pacing during Kevin's darker moments. In hindsight, the story ultimately reinforces a hopeful message about empathy and friendship. But during its first television run, the emotional tension caught audiences off guard. Number 4. The Adventures of Mark Twain, 1985. Unlike most entries on this list, The Adventures of Mark Twain was not originally a television series. It was a claymation feature film released in the mid-1980s, though it later appeared in television broadcasts during that period. Created using detailed stop-motion animation, the film follows a fictional journey where Mark Twain travels through the sky in a fantastical airship. Along the way, he meets characters from his famous stories, including Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, and Becky Thatcher. For much of its runtime, the movie feels whimsical and imaginative. The airship drifts through surreal landscapes while the characters encounter strange worlds inspired by Twain's literature. The tone is curious, playful, and adventurous, giving viewers the impression they are watching a light-hearted fantasy. Then the film suddenly takes a dramatic turn. In one sequence, the characters encounter a mysterious figure known only as the mysterious stranger. At first, the character appears calm and almost friendly, a pale figure with quiet supernatural abilities. But the tone quickly becomes unsettling. The stranger begins creating tiny human civilizations out of clay. Entire miniature communities form before the character's eyes. Moments later, he casually destroys them, wiping out these fragile worlds without hesitation. The scene grows even darker when the figure calmly reveals his identity. He claims to be Satan. For audiences expecting a gentle animated story, the moment was shocking. The conversation turns philosophical, exploring themes of humanity, destruction, and moral indifference. The sequence feels less like children's entertainment and more like existential reflection. When the film appeared on television in certain regions during the 1980s, some parents found the sequence deeply unsettling. Number 3. G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, 1985. Action cartoons dominated the mid-1980s, and G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, was one of the most popular. The series blended military adventure with science fiction villains, high-tech weapons, and dramatic battles between the heroic G.I. Joe team and the sinister Cobra organization. Most episodes followed a familiar pattern. Cobra launched a scheme to seize power or valuable technology. The G.I. Joe team intervened, and the story ended with the villains defeated and a short moral lesson for viewers. The tone was energetic but straightforward, rarely venturing into deeper psychological territory. Then one episode broke that formula in a way few fans expected. The story, titled There's No Place Like Springfield, centers on the sailor-turned-commando known as Shipwreck. At the beginning of the episode, he wakes up in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Everything appears peaceful. He has a loving wife, 2 children, and a comfortable home. At first, the situation seems like a pleasant surprise, but something feels wrong. Shipwreck begins noticing strange inconsistencies. Conversations repeat themselves. Neighbors behave oddly. Certain memories don't match his past experiences. Yet the perfect suburban environment slowly starts to feel artificial and unsettling. Eventually, the truth is revealed. Shipwreck has been captured by Cobra and placed inside a sophisticated virtual simulation. The entire suburban world has been constructed to manipulate his emotions and lower his defenses. Cobra hopes that by trapping him in a convincing illusion of happiness, he will unknowingly reveal important military secrets. As the episode progresses, the illusion begins to break apart. The once perfect environment becomes increasingly unstable. Familiar faces change behavior, and the comforting suburban setting transforms into a psychological trap. For a Saturday morning cartoon, the concept was remarkably complex. Instead of simple action, the story explores deception, identity, and emotional manipulation. Shandadite Number 2. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, 1983. He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was built around heroic battles between good and evil. The powerful warrior, He-Man defended the magical world of Eternia from the villainous Skeletor and his armies. Most episodes followed a predictable pattern of action and adventure. But one story introduced a far more serious emotional conflict. The problem with power begins when Skeletor creates a device capable of controlling He-Man's mind. Under its influence, the hero is forced to attack innocent civilians. During the chaos, He-Man believes he has accidentally killed a man. The moment devastates him. For perhaps the first time in the series, the hero loses confidence in his own strength. Instead of continuing the fight, he chooses to abandon his identity as He-Man, believing his power is too dangerous. The rest of the episode focuses on guilt, responsibility, and the burden of great power. It is far more reflective than the usual action-driven stories surrounding it. Eventually, the truth is revealed. The apparent death was part of Skeletor's manipulation. The victim survives, and He-Man regains his confidence. Even with the positive resolution, the darker emotional tone stood out sharply against other episodes in the series. For many viewers, the idea that a beloved hero might accidentally harm someone was shocking. It challenged the normally simple morality of children's action cartoons. Because of its unusual tone and heavier themes, the episode was sometimes scheduled less frequently in early broadcast rotations. Number 1. The Care Bears Movie, 1985. By the mid-1980s, the Care Bears had become one of the most recognizable children's franchises in the world. The colorful characters appeared everywhere: television specials, toy store shelves, greeting cards, and storybooks. Their message was simple and comforting. Kindness, empathy, and friendship could solve almost any problem. But when the Care Bears movie arrived in theaters in 1985, many audiences were surprised by how dark parts of the story felt compared with the cheerful image of the brand. The film centers on a lonely boy named Nicholas. Struggling with feelings of isolation and resentment, he becomes vulnerable to the influence of an ancient evil spirit trapped inside a magical book. The spirit senses Nicholas's anger and slowly begins manipulating him, promising power and control in exchange for obedience. As the influence grows stronger, Nicholas starts performing increasingly dangerous acts. The villain uses him as a puppet, attempting to unleash destructive forces that could spread misery across the world. Instead of an outside monster attacking the Care Bears, the real danger comes from a child losing control of his emotions. Several scenes show Nicholas changing both emotionally and physically as the spirit tightens its grip. The animation becomes darker, with swirling shadows, glowing eyes, and ominous storm imagery surrounding the possessed boy. For young viewers expecting a gentle adventure with cheerful teddy bears, these moments felt far more intense than anything previously associated with the franchise. But parents were particularly surprised by how seriously the film approached themes of loneliness and emotional vulnerability. Rather than simply defeating an external villain, the Care Bears must help Nicholas confront his own pain and rediscover compassion. Ultimately, the story delivers a hopeful message about friendship, empathy, and emotional healing. Nicholas breaks free from the spirit's influence, proving that kindness can overcome manipulation and despair. Saturday morning cartoons in the 1980s looked bright, cheerful, and harmless on the surface. But as this countdown shows, a few episodes and animated films pushed far beyond those expectations. Some frightened children, others sparked controversy among parents and broadcasters, and a few quietly disappeared from regular rotation after surprising audiences. These moments remind us that animation has always been capable of exploring darker ideas, even in a decade best remembered for colorful characters and cheerful theme songs.